She was on the cover of Forbes magazine, then Fortune, then Incorporated. She was called the next Steve Jobs, the youngest female self-made billionaire in American history, a revolutionary who was going to change medicine forever. Her name was Elizabeth Holmes, and the company she built, Theranos, was worth $9 billion at its peak. There was just one problem. The technology did not work. It had never worked. And while investors poured hundreds of millions of dollars into the company, while hospitals signed contracts, while patients received life-altering medical results from the technology, Elizabeth Holmes knew the entire thing was a lie. This is the story of how one woman convinced the most powerful people in the world to believe something that was scientifically impossible. How she built a $9 billion company on a product that did not exist. And how the lie she told did not just cost investors their money. It put patients' lives at risk. Elizabeth Holmes grew up in Washington, D.C. Her family had a history of success. A great-great-uncle had founded a university. Her father worked in government and at Enron. Yes, that Enron. From childhood, Holmes was obsessed with one idea: becoming a great entrepreneur. Becoming the next Steve Jobs, specifically. She studied Mandarin in high school. She enrolled at Stanford University to study chemical engineering. She was brilliant, driven, and absolutely certain she was destined for greatness. Then, in 2003, at 19 years old, she dropped out of Stanford. She had an idea, and she was not willing to wait. The idea was this: blood tests are one of the most powerful tools in modern medicine. They can detect cancer, heart disease, diabetes, hundreds of conditions. Early detection saves lives. The earlier you catch a disease, the better your chances of treating it successfully. But traditional blood tests have a problem. They require large amounts of blood drawn by a needle from a vein. The samples are sent to laboratories. Results take days. The process is expensive and uncomfortable. Holmes believed she could change all of that. What if you could run hundreds of blood tests from a single drop of blood taken with a finger prick? What if results came back in hours instead of days? What if the technology was small enough to sit in a pharmacy, accessible to everyone, affordable for anyone? It was a genuinely beautiful idea. The only problem was that it was scientifically impossible with the technology available at the time. The physics of blood testing simply did not allow for what Holmes was describing. Holmes either did not know this, or she knew and decided to build the company anyway and figure out the science later. Either way, she told nobody. Holmes founded Theranos in 2003 with her Stanford tuition refund. Then she did something that turned out to be the most important strategic decision she ever made. She surrounded herself with the most impressive board of directors ever assembled for a startup company. Not scientists, not medical professionals, not people who could evaluate whether the technology actually worked. Politicians, military generals, statesmen, George Shultz, former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, James Mattis, former Marine General who later became Secretary of Defense, William Perry, former Secretary of Defense, 2 former U.S. Senators. These were some of the most powerful and respected people in American public life. And not one of them had the scientific background to evaluate whether the blood testing technology actually worked. That was not an accident. Holmes understood something about trust and reputation that Bernie Madoff had also understood. If the right names are associated with your company, investors stop asking questions about the product and start asking how they can get involved. The board was not there to provide oversight. It was there to provide cover. The fundraising that followed was extraordinary. Holmes raised hundreds of millions of dollars from investors, including Rupert Murdoch, who invested $125 million personally, the Walton family, the DeVos family, major venture capital firms. At its peak in 2014, Theranos was valued at $9 billion, making Holmes worth an estimated $4.5 billion on paper. She was on the cover of every major business publication in America. She gave TED Talks. She spoke at conferences alongside presidents and world leaders. She wore the same black turtleneck every day as a deliberate homage to Steve Jobs. And the entire time, the machine at the center of everything was not working. The Edison. That was what Theranos called their blood testing device. A small black box that was supposed to run hundreds of tests from a single finger prick drop of blood. In reality, the Edison could only reliably run a handful of tests. For the vast majority of the tests Theranos was offering to patients, they were secretly using conventional blood testing machines made by other companies. The same machines that everyone else used, diluting the blood samples first to try to make them work at smaller volumes, which introduced errors and inaccuracies into the results. Real patients were receiving inaccurate medical results from Theranos tests. A patient whose test incorrectly suggested they might have HIV. The panic and terror that followed before a retest showed the original result was wrong. Cancer screenings, returning false positives, or missing cancers that were there. Patients making medical decisions based on results that were not accurate. Holmes knew about the accuracy problems. Her senior staff knew. Former employees who raised concerns internally were silenced or forced to sign aggressive non-disclosure agreements. At least one employee who tried to raise concerns externally was threatened with legal action. The culture inside Theranos was one of fear. Anyone who questioned the technology was treated as disloyal. Anyone who suggested the product did not work was pushed out. The person who finally broke the story was a journalist named John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal. Carreyrou had been tipped off by a source inside Theranos. He spent months investigating, tracking down former employees, scientists, experts who could evaluate whether the technology was real. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published his investigation. The story said Theranos was not actually using its own technology for the vast majority of tests. That results were inaccurate. That the Edison device did not do what the company claimed. Holmes went on television immediately. She called the story categorically false and defamatory. She was calm, confident, articulate. She looked directly into the camera and denied everything. It was a performance that bought her several more months. But the investigation had started something that could not be stopped. Federal regulators from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services inspected the Theranos laboratory. They found serious deficiencies in quality control. They found that Theranos test results posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. In 2016, the CMS revoked Theranos laboratory certification and banned Holmes from operating a medical laboratory for 2 years. The company began to collapse. Major pharmacy chain Walgreens, which had partnered with Theranos to offer blood tests in its stores, terminated the partnership. Investors demanded answers. Investigations multiplied. The $9 billion valuation evaporated. By 2018, Theranos was dissolved entirely. In June 2018, Elizabeth Holmes and her former president and romantic partner, Ramesh Sunny Balwani, were indicted on federal charges of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The trial that followed was one of the most watched in Silicon Valley history. Holmes took the stand in her own defense. She blamed Balwani for much of what went wrong. She claimed she genuinely believed the technology worked and was as deceived as everyone else. The jury did not fully believe her. In January 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of criminal fraud. She was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. Balwani was convicted separately on all 12 counts he faced and sentenced to nearly 13 years. Holmes reported to prison in May 2023. She was 39 years old. The Theranos story is often told as a story about Silicon Valley culture, about the fake-it-till-you-make-it mentality, about investors who were too dazzled by a charismatic founder to ask hard questions about the science. All of that is true. But the most important part of the story is not about Silicon Valley at all. It is about what happens when the desire to believe in something, the emotional need for a story to be true, overrides the obligation to verify it. Every person who invested in Theranos wanted the story to be true. A young visionary, a revolutionary technology, a chance to be part of something that would change medicine forever and make them rich in the process. That desire to believe is not a character flaw. It is a human instinct. We are wired to respond to compelling stories, to charismatic people, to the possibility of being part of something historic. Financial fraudsters do not succeed because they are better at math than their victims. They succeed because they are better at understanding this instinct and exploiting it. Elizabeth Holmes understood it. Bernie Madoff understood it. The executives at Enron understood it. The pattern is always the same. A compelling vision, a charismatic leader, the right names attached, social proof from people you respect, and the subtle suggestion that questioning any of it means you lack vision. The defense against it is not cynicism. It is not refusing to believe in anything. It is one simple habit: separating the story from the evidence. Ask not whether the story is compelling. Ask whether the evidence is real. Because the most dangerous lies in history were not told by people who seemed untrustworthy. They were told by people who seemed like exactly the kind of person you should trust. If this opened your eyes, subscribe. Because every week on Clarify, we cover the financial stories and hidden systems that traditional media is too distracted to explain properly.